Welcome to the Driving Change podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Welcome back to the Driving Change podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Bloomfield, as usual. And as usual, we have a really fascinating guest today. And I don't even know where to begin with Kerrie Lee Brown, because you may not know her name, but you probably know brands that she might have touched. You might know even some publications. You might have read articles, and heck, you might even have read her book along the way. But really what I was fascinated about when we invited her to become a guest on the show is her life story and her experience. Everything you're going to get to hear from her story, from near-death experiences all the way to a passion for storytelling, for helping young women understand their superpowers and how to function in a really high, powerful, almost male-driven environment. Like, she's got so much expertise for you, the listener, today. But, she started off, she was kind of known as a North American magazine, just juggernaut. She was in journalism, editorial stuff. She had a career spanning in leadership, high profile publications. She really got into the storytelling piece, which you all know, my listeners know, that's my bag. That's what I love to talk about. She's led and managed and mentored teams of award-winning writers, designers, and marketers. She's really helped a lot of C-suite executives with branding and companies that you know the logos of. She's one of those, she's like a female Forrest Gump. She's had so many different things she's been able to accomplish. Today, she's the founder of Red Lily. It's a media, redlilylife.com. We're going to get into that stuff later. She's written an amazing book. I'll tease you. It's called My Heart, Myself. It might give you a little teaser to what might come out of her story in a little bit. And she's really, when you start looking her up, she's everywhere out there. When you go to look at, looking at for the things that the value that she's adding back to the world today. So we're going to unpack her story together. And I think you're going to take a lot away from the things that she's learned from her own journey. So Kerrie Lee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here.
And by the way, I try to do short intros. I could have spent like 10 minutes introing you with all your accolades and all the stuff you've written and the publications you've been on. And there's something about a Guinness Book of World Records. What was that about? I didn't even see it. What you're in there? What are you in there for?
Yeah, I actually ended up, I took a stint from my publishing world when we go back in my story, and I got the company I was working for at the time into the Guinness Book of World Records in the mind-body space. So that's a whole other thing that I used to do in the past as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe we'll touch on that later. So, all right. So you know the drill. The first question is the only question that gets scripted, and our guests know this. For us to really want to know what you're good at, because we don't really care about that until we really know where you come from, right? And who made you who you are, what made you who you are. So take us all the way back. As far as you like to go, I like to go all the way back into where you grew up and who influenced you. And what was that Kerrie Lee origin story?
Well, how long do you have, right? No, I'm kidding. Well, I live in Denver, Colorado now, but I'm actually Canadian. I'm from Toronto, Canada. So I don't know if you have any listeners out there, hopefully internationally. And I grew up just outside Toronto. I'm a city girl at heart, have always loved the city, spent numerous days going down on the train into the city and the big bad city kind of thing, because I was always, in awe of all the different people and the different cultures, very multicultural there. So I grew up, I have a sister, my parents are from abroad. My dad is from Ireland, Dublin, and my mom was from Wales. So we were a very small family, immigration family from overseas in the UK and Ireland. And so we grew up very, very close. And so that's kind of where my journey started, obviously. From there, I went through school. So my background, funny enough, because people always think this is quite interesting. My first degree actually in university is in political science and international foreign relations. And I was originally going to go into law. That was something I thought that I would want to do, or because again, coming back to the storytelling side, I always like to investigate and kind of look into people's past and figure out their psychology and everything to do with what makes them tick. But then when I was doing my undergrad, I took some courses in media and communications. And since I've always loved writing, I couldn't believe that you could actually make a career out of it. I didn't realize that working in media was really a thing. I didn't really know. I mean, I saw people on TV, newscasters and that, but I didn't understand or didn't even realize the scope in which media crosses from, print journalism to, at the time, radio. There's so many different things. And so I ended up doing my master's in journalism after that. And that's kind of the start of my career and where my whole life has really gone from.
So those early days growing up in Toronto and taking the train into the city, and I always like to know, we our values are formed at a really young age, right? And our beliefs start to get cemented in. Who were some of the most important influencers to you in those early days where they started to paint a picture for you? Maybe you didn't even realize it at the time, but as you reflect back on it, there was more meaningful impact there than maybe you'd even realized.
Yeah, and I had several mentors in those early stages, from elementary school right through kind of high school and then into university and my first few years of working. Besides, obviously, my parents, who are obviously my mom's passed now, but my dad is still around. He's in Toronto. We're a very close family and small. So we grew up, my sister and I, having to go back to Europe and to the UK all the time to see family. So we were really close in Toronto. And so that really was the start of our core value system, because there was only the four of us for Thanksgiving, the four of us for Christmas kind of thing. So that was the start of that. But outside of that, I had many mentors. I mean, I remember having some amazing teachers, even in elementary school, who I must admit, I'm not shy now, but at the time, I was a bit on the shyer side in growing up. So I guess you could say I was a bit of a teacher's pet. My nickname back then was Browner, because my last name, but I liked to help the teachers and I was pretty studious. But I had some really great teachers that really mentored me and brought me out of my shell. And then I just remember too, through some internships in journalism, I met some great journalists at the time. This one guy, Joey C., and he owns Joey C. Communications in Toronto. And he actually introduced me to the world of entertainment and reporting and journalism and, investigative journalism. And I started to go to a lot of events and cover them for his Toronto magazine. So, along the way, when I look back, I think all those people that I can kind of think of have really formed my values. And about, those you can trust, authenticity, trust within your circles. And those are the type of things, too, that I try to instill with my boys, because I have two boys now, one's 15 and one's 20. And, they've been along for the ride. I mean, even moving to the U.S. was a whole big thing, too. All of us moved here. So, yeah, I think it really starts with my family and my parents. Probably that's where it starts.
So when you think about the early days, whether it was maybe your preteen to teen and maybe that season, because you're a very creative person now, obviously, and you don't normally evolve into the storytelling. Normally there's a spark of it early. Did you have like a big imagination and you enjoyed, you said you were a little bit more reserved and introverted. Did you like the escape of writing and in story and narrative? Was that an early thing for you?
I've always journaled. And I know, back then, gosh, we're talking years ago, right? We're talking about those times where you had those diaries with a little key, that you kind of hide so your parents don't find it.
Right.
They can just figure it out anyway. I always journaled. I was a storyteller at heart from as long as I can remember. And I mean, sometimes they were poems. So I remember writing poems that didn't even really make sense, but they were my reflections at the time as a child, just little tiny haikus. And I remember doing that. And then I remember also, because our travels every year took us overseas to see family, I remember writing about each trip and just in this journal book. And so, yeah, the writing was always innate in me. I always loved English. I loved old books and Shakespeare and all that. I loved all the English. And then the creative writing side of me really came out as well. Now, I must admit, I was shyer, more or less. I wasn't very boisterous. However, I was a dancer. So my creativity came out. I was actually an internationally ranked Irish dancer.
Oh.
So I have tons of friends that I competed with and are still friends with that went on to do Riverdance and Lord of the Dance and all that. So my whole childhood was based around performance, if you will, on stage. in different ways. And I think that was really also an outlet for me, if you will, was Irish dancing on stage and on the international stage. At the time, I went to Ireland 3 times as a youngster to compete. So I think that creativity, that kind of performance element, the storytelling through your dance and movement was always a big part of me. And then the journaling and writing. I used to write. I had a lot of pen pals too. I mean, my cousins, again, were all overseas. And back then, certainly no emails or anything, social media. So it was all pen pal writing. And I remember that was a really start to my writing as well.
I bet that lit your dad up, right? Being an Irish dancer. I
Oh,
bet
yeah.
that was just,
Well, that's how I got into it,
right.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
of course. I mean, it was filled with heritage, and we were very close with our Irish community in the Toronto area, of course. And I mean, yes, it was a big part of my growing up. That was my main sport, really.
that's great. So
Hmm.
it's funny because you mentioned that. I'm thinking a friend of mine who's also been a guest on here, Todd Herman. He wrote a book called The Alter Ego, and
Ah,
he was a coach for people like Kobe Bryant and others, and Beyonce, helped them come up with this alter ego that was a performance personality where their mind said, okay, they weren't afraid to perform because it really wasn't them.
right.
Because they weren't afraid of failure because it was another character. And sometimes you don't realize we did that when we were growing. So maybe that alter ego of you as the dancer and the performer, you weren't afraid there because that was a little sanctuary in some ways.
Yeah, and it's like it's acting, really. I mean, dance is just the
Yeah,
same thing you're putting on a performance. But also, I was in the school plays. Now it's funny, right? You think, well, if you're in the school plays, you can't be that shy. But again, taking on different characters, right,
right.
and showing that you can be as creative as you want within different characters and within different kind of activities without showing your true vulnerability, if you will, because it's
Right.
not about you.
That's right.
That's what I had to really grow into. And again, like as the years went on and everything, that's where I started to grow into my own story,
Right.
which is also part of my evolution and personal growth as well.
Well, that's what I'd love to talk about with some of that awareness that you had as you were going through there and you went into journalism and you always had a kind of a bent toward writing and creative, but when was the first moment where you started to feel like you'd been too busy telling your story through the characters of other people and not living your own? When did that start to kind of happen?
I'll tell you I know exactly when it happened. What's really funny is it was probably at 10, almost 15. Can you believe this? Almost 15 years into my career.
Hmm.
And I remember when I had a heart attack at age 39.
What?
And yeah, so this is part of my story, and this is also the basis of my book. But maybe we're jumping ahead. But I had worked in publishing for a long time I got my first real journalism job in the fitness industry and worked for a men's bodybuilding magazine. Can you imagine that? I mean, I knew nothing about it, but it was the first job that I was able to get out of journalism school. Moved into this, again, you could say character role of being an assistant editor, always interviewing other people. I was writing about their stories. This was the start of my telling stories of other people.
Who are some of the characters you got to interview during that time that you found fascinating?
I mean, my first real celebrity interview was with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then I moved on and did Sylvester Stallone. So while I was working in the men's category and, launching fitness magazines and bodybuilding magazines, which was all foreign to me at the time, it really gave me those skills as a journalist, as a young journalist, to really become eager to learn people's stories, to learn what made them tick, and to learn about new categories or industries and different kind of people around the world. And then from there, I moved into the women's fitness category, again, still highlighting other people's stories. So again, I hadn't even touched on my own yet, right? This is where, when you were mentioning about, the storytelling, when did I kind of cross that kind of bridge, if you will, to be able to share mine? It didn't happen until years after that. I mean, I then went on and took a short stint from publishing, and I went to the corporate side representing a mind body wellness industry. And I was the VP of communications, again, representing a brand, representing the executives and the owners of this business and speaking on their behalf. And then when I went back to publishing, I ended up at Today's Parent Magazine, which is the largest parenting magazine in Canada. And again, telling stories about other people in the magazine again. But that is the point where there was a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. And that's when I actually had my heart health scare. So it wasn't until after I had my heart health scare that I was actually really encouraged by fellow editors and publishers to share my own story then. And that was the beginning of it. So I was married, had, my children and everything before I really started to share my own story.
All right. So now hold on a second. You're calling what you had a heart health scare. I think you might be underselling it just a little bit. Can you tell folks what happened there? And this was a pretty big deal, right? And you're like, what are you, 39 or 40 right in this time frame?
I was 39. I had a heart attack at age 39. It really, it's funny because I'm a heart health advocate now. And when I look back on all the signs and symptoms kind of leading up to the time that it happened, it's just unbelievable that I didn't stop and think and get my self checked out. And it's one of the biggest things I tell people now is that if you feel any symptoms or anything that's off in your life, really go and see a doctor and go see the professionals, because I didn't. And so, it all started on one evening, and I was putting the kids to bed at the time. And we lived just outside Toronto in a beautiful, farm. And I, just like a normal evening, the pressures of the day had caught up with me, but I was having time with the family. And I felt an absolute excruciating pain in my shoulder, like literally as though someone out of the blue hit me with a baseball bat. Like it literally felt like that, which was really crazy. I thought, is there a ghost in the house? Like I really didn't know what was happening. It was out of the blue. And funny enough, it was on my right side. So this was the whole story of, coming to life here, was that up until that point, I always heard and always thought that it was always on your left side. If you feel tingling or anything, you do, right? Until it happens to you. Well, again, I still didn't believe it was anything other than that was just weird and very weird. But what happened was I started to feel extremely exhausted, like in an instant. Like I wanted to lay down there right there and go to sleep on the floor. Like it was so weird. And then I started getting out of breath. So I went down to the kitchen where my husband was and I said, I got to go to bed. And we're talking about 7:00 at night. I said, I'm exhausted all of a sudden. And he really wanted to call the ambulance. But being a hardcore mom and working mom, I had a morning to get to the next day. We were busy and just trying to, get the kids off to bed. I was like, no. I'm fine. I just need to sleep it off. And this was a big thing for me because again, I know men are like this too, but especially women and moms who are really trying to do it all at that time. And I've learned from this experience. I was not recognizing that this was a heart attack or anything really to do with my heart. I just thought I was exhausted. Yeah. So I did go to bed. If you can imagine that, I did go to bed and I didn't sleep all night. I had the excruciating pain went down my back. Again, just thinking this is bizarre, but never, ever, ever picturing that it could be something to do with my heart. I really just didn't. And the next day I was fine, but I went to work. I didn't even go to the doctor. And it was funny because it wasn't for a few more days after that. My mom, who was alive at the time, she's the one who encouraged me to go. You have to go get this checked out. I had several panic attacks that week. Something was going on with my body and I didn't realize what it was. So I finally went to the doctor. They confirmed through blood work and obviously all the heart stuff, the cardiologist I was assigned to, that it was a mild heart attack. And then I was very fortunate that it wasn't fatal. It was such a learning thing for me that I was like, there's no way. There is no way this was. But the thing is that I've learned is that women in particular have symptoms of heart attacks and strokes for that matter in very different ways than the norm from what the media tells you. And I've learned that now. It can even just be thinking that it's indigestion from food can be a heart attack of a sort. So I went on to do all these different tests with cardiologists and all these different doctors. Turns out that I actually had an electrical issue from birth that I didn't know about. And then over time, the stress levels were aiding in this basically a malfunction, if you will, of my heart up until age 39. So I'm so fortunate that nothing worse happened, but it was definitely something I needed to have cardiac surgery for, which I did, heart surgery. And I learned my lesson. You have to listen to your body because the stress that I was putting on myself, and we hear about stress and how bad it can be for your well-being, it really put that pressure on my heart. And it was basically giving me a wake-up call that I better do something now or something even worse is going to happen. So it changed my life, not to mention my family's. So that's kind of what that ended up to be. And then it really changed even the path in my professional and personal life.
So how long did it take you from that, the moment of, okay, you were going through the process, you had the surgery, and obviously you're having probably these little mini epiphanies, but sometimes we're also, because the very attitude that got us to not believe we were having a heart attack is the one that'll help us recover from this quicker and get right back to work, right? So how long did it take you to really make some changes in your life from that point?
I like to say, and this was years ago now, and I am still making those changes. See, like this is the thing about, our well-being in general, is that I did learn a lot from that. I changed the way I ate. And the thing was, when I really evaluated my life then, I wasn't living poorly. I think stress was stress was the biggest indicator. But I was also commuting into that city job there 2 hours each way every day for 8 years. Yep. 4 hours a day. That was the train, subway, walking,
Yeah.
you know how it is in big cities. And I lived in the kind of the country, and it all was adding up. And there's another part that I realized afterwards, all in hindsight, when I really took a deep dive into how I was living my life. It was all go, go, go. From the moment I got up in the morning to rushing to the train station to rushing, as so many of us do. And then I also realized that those long commute times where I was sitting on a train, I was normally either writing, I was actually penning a book at the same time, funny enough, ironically, at the same time. So it was like, I felt at that time that was a stress relief, but I also now realized that I was putting more and more pressure on myself, and I wasn't taking the time to just digest with myself and to meditate or just to have a nice conversation with someone. I was still working on the train. I never gave myself that time off.
You didn't have the peaceful, the serene earbuds in, looking out over the countryside, reflecting on the beauty of life as you were doing your commute. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't. And I it's funny because you think, well, I'm quiet. No one's bothering me. I'm just journaling. But I think it was the stress of the day. I never really took time to debrief, as in my body and just like my mind. So those were some of the things that I really realized I had to change. So I started implementing more self-care into my life. And that's where now my book is all about self-care, and it's about recognizing signs that you need to slow down when you really need to before it becomes too late. And from there, my whole life changed. I changed jobs. We moved to the US. I mean, so much changed because I started to put my own health and my family's health at the forefront.
So how long was it from your heart attack to, because I think people go through these journeys that we all do, right? And it's just chapters of self-discovery. And then usually those of us who have a purpose-driven mindset, we have some self-discovery, and then we're like, well, I want to share this with others so that they maybe can benefit from my lessons. How long was that from the heart attack to the point where you're like, I need to put this stuff in, whether the book, My Heart, Myself was cathartic or whether it was purpose-driven? I'd love to know how you feel about that. But like, what was that time frame where you realize it's time to take what you're learning and apply it so others can benefit from it?
So I'll tell you what. So at work, when I was still working at the parenting magazine, they obviously knew what happened, and I was going in for surgery. But I was still working there. And my colleagues and my immediate people, obviously close to me, knew what happened. But this was one of the other kind of self-discovery things that I learned, is that in some really weird way, and it was a personal struggle that I had, I didn't want to share my story publicly, even though I was in the media. I was a public figure. I would do like our Toronto breakfast television and morning shows every week to promote our magazine. Right. And, the media does that. And I still didn't want to admit it because I felt like, having been an editor-in-chief at a fitness magazine, I was also the founding editor of Clean Eating magazine, which is a nutrition magazine. Clean Eating is out there right now. I mean, I should have known better, right? So to have a heart attack based on an electrical issue I didn't know about, plus all the stress I was putting on myself, when people looked at me like I had it all together and I didn't have a care in the world, I could handle it all. It really put a lot of stress on me about sharing my story. So to answer your question, it was probably about almost 4 to 5 months before I shared my story publicly. And that was in Chatelaine magazine, which is the largest women's magazine in all of Canada. And it was the editor there that said, you need to share this story because I bet you there's a ton of women and men who really need to hear it. Because if you can share it and you're in the public eye as a magazine editor and on TV, then people will look to you and go, wow, if it can happen to her, it can happen to me. And so it was about 4 or 5 months that I actually needed to digest it, to deal with it, to go through the motions before I shared it publicly. And then it was after that I decided to write a book about it.
So this brings me to that idea that I always, it constantly goes through my mind, is the most important story that you will hear today is the one that you tell yourself. And
Yes.
You were telling yourself a story that wasn't true in that interim, right? You were telling yourself a different story than was reality, whether you were doing it out of fear or out of guilt or whatever the reason was. But then suddenly you realize, okay, look, if this was somebody else and I was telling their story of this would be easy, but this is my story. But then you got over the bridge, you got over the hump. And was it that first interview where they said you got that encouragement? Because part of what I believe is that we're here to help each other self-discover. Sometimes we need a little bit of outside influence to nudge us to realize that, man, this is like, you just needed that push. Is that what you needed? You needed someone else to kind of nudge you?
I did. And the editor of like that women's magazine, like I said, was really nudging me because first of all, she knew her readers would want to hear it and it would make a great impact. But two, as a woman to a woman and a colleague in the journalism world, she said, you know what, Kerrie, this has happened to you. She was like a voice of reason. She goes, this has happened to you. And, whether you know or not, there's a reason for it, that this happened. You survived, you're getting through it because you are a storyteller. And at the end of the day, I was a journalist and I had a platform. And she said, your calling now is to share your own story along with other people's. And so you're going to impact people. So she was extremely helpful in doing that and getting me there to where I really did accept the fact that it was part of, again, my calling to do so, because I felt like people might think I was a failure. Like how, I was 39 years old. I wasn't a smoker. I wasn't overweight. There was a lot going on, and even mentally that I aided in this. And I think it was something I had to come to terms with. And then I decided to share my story. So yeah, there was a caveat there. And then when we got the results, like when the article was first published and the reader feedback came in that publication, it was just astounding. The amount of people that could relate to the stress levels and trying to seem like, everything was okay when in hindsight it wasn't. And so that was really the what catapulted my advocacy there.
And I think at least it's becoming, there used to be a stigma attached to that, right? Where you talked about self-care and mental well-being, and there was all of that. Well, that's all weakness. It's like the word vulnerability,
Exactly.
But, people like Brene Brown have been able to really champion things like vulnerability. And now, and I think people think, well, it's only a problem for guys. Guys don't want to talk about it. Well, no, females are just as bad, right? Because you got to be super mom and super woman, and it's almost sometimes worse for women, and because they internalize. Guys will express themselves more often than women will in a negative way. There's an outlet where they release their stress some way, where women tend to. And I'm over. You tell me if I'm way off track here, but they tend to internalize it and keep it inside, and it's almost like this combustion engine that's just kind of waiting to explode. And I'm so glad that people like you are out there, because as my daughter Grace, who's 24, I want her to have a different path in the next generation. I want them to be able to recognize you got to take care of yourself. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're not productive. It doesn't mean that stop living up to a standard in a culture that's go, 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 go until you implode. So when you hear me talk like that, first of all, correct me on anything I'm saying wrong, but then give some guidance and direction to what you're finding your conversations are like with women today that are in the similar boat you were in, whether they're 24 or 44. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? And then what are you telling them?
Yeah. And it's so true, Jeff, because when I look back again, right? I mean, you're right. This was years ago. And you're right. The stigma around mental health, I mean, it's completely different now, right? There's a lot more measures out there, a lot more conversation in the world, social media. When this happened to me, I felt like people would judge me because I was in the public eye and I had a high stressful media executive role. I thought they would think I can't handle stress. So then why am I even in that role? Like, what am I deserving to have my career when I have a heart attack because I can't handle it? It was something in my own mind that I was doubting myself. It was the imposter syndrome. And self-care wasn't really a thing that was so much talked about. So and I also have two boys. So, in a household of so much testosterone, I was the mom. I was the career woman. I was the mom. I was the one commuting. And, my husband obviously was successful too. But the thing was, I was the mom. So I still had to hold it all together, if you will. Now, whenever I go on podcasts or I get interviewed myself or do speaking about this, I have so many women come up to me, again, those ages that you mentioned, from the young 20s right up through to 50, 60, saying, you know what? I totally can relate. And now that you're sharing your voice and what happened to you, I am not afraid to ask for help or to say, I need to slow down, or I need some time away, or I need to say no to things, because now it's more acceptable to be able to think about our own well-being. And I had to get to this point. I didn't think that back then, especially being in the journalism and media world. It's like many other, obviously, competitive industries. It was very competitive, and there was a lot of pressure on me, and also I put on myself to be that person that looked like I had it all together, because I was literally on film or in the magazine writing. And so nowadays, so many people have podcasts and on social media. It wasn't like that back then. So those who you saw on TV, you just assumed they had it all together and they're confident and they, and so it really has changed. So women today tend to come to me and say, thank you for opening that door. You shared your experience. And now I'm not afraid to talk to my boss at work, or I'm not afraid to talk to my parents if you're younger, that they have a lot of pressure on themselves to actually admit that it's not a weakness and it's not a failure either. If anything, it's actually going to aid you in your success and your productivity down the road. And that's what I learned. I wanted to be as healthy and happy as possible for my kids and my family. So taking a step backwards sometimes, like as in a break or thinking about your own self-care, will only catapult you further ahead, instead of going, and then you're not going to get where you would end up wanting to go anyway. So I hope I can bring that to the forefront with many, many people, no matter what you do in business school or even in your own social lives. I just think it's a huge message that needs to be told.
And that the great irony is that when you begin to express to others that you're feeling this way, the art of expressing it itself, due to our physiology, naturally reduces your stress.
Exactly. And that's the thing, like I'm a huge proponent of is storytelling. I mean, not only from the writing, I conduct writers workshops now, the art of storytelling, and really some people just don't know how to put their words or their story on paper. They don't even know where to start. And I'm not talking about for these to be published. It's just really the art of doing it so you can release. It's a form of release. And so even talking like your podcast, I'm sure that this is therapeutic. I mean, it's great to express these things, to reiterate them, to reevaluate. Me talk about my experience again. It's therapeutic for me, and I'm sure your listeners. And so that was one of the reasons after I published my book, which was very therapeutic for me, got it on Amazon and everything, I started getting such great feedback from people who were just like, I just relate to your authenticity of sharing, being vulnerable and open. And so from there, that's why I decided to launch redlilylife.com, because it's a storytelling platform where over 1,500 people now have shared their own stories, and for free. I mean, it's my passion project. I let people share their stories, no matter how big or small they want to even share. There's no like parameters around that. And it's a release, whether you want to do it to get a snippet to start writing a book, or whether you just want to get something off your chest. I've really impacted people around the world. And that was my whole point with starting that platform. And it's not just about heart health either. I mean, there is stories on there about divorce, about, career change, relationships, everything. My only caveat is I want every story that's told on there to have a good lesson learned in the end, a positive message, because I think that's also part of that growth and that personal growth, that we're all evolving and going through things our whole lives and always trying to improve things. And so as long as you can learn from those experiences, which I have with my heart attack, I think that's going to help other people. So that's kind of where I am with that.
So give us maybe 2 or 3, I don't know, words of wisdom, techniques, advice that you have in your book. And then I'd love to learn a little bit more about Red Lily Life too before we go. But give some like here's some strategies that you like to lay out, or just a listener can pick up, because I want them to go read the book, but I want them to also say, here's a little teaser. Here's some things that I'll give you for free, right? Here's some things to go do right now that you've learned that really make a difference.
Okay. Yeah. And I have in my book 10 signs you need to slow down. And, some of them might sound quite obvious or common sense, right? But
do I need all 10 of them before I really slow down, or any one of them should cause me to slow down, right?
Really, any of them are going to help in some way, right?
So I want the listener to hear that. It doesn't mean you have to get all 10 of them right to slow down.
No. I mean, I think that this is really about recognizing your own needs for your own body, mind, and soul. I mean, it's really, everyone's individual. So my experience is going to be different from someone else. But when it comes down to stress management, some of the major things are really getting to know your own body, listening to your body. It was the biggest thing I didn't do. Leading up to my heart attack, when I look back now, I was having more frequent migraines and headaches. I was having more aches and pains than normal. I was getting more out of breath walking up the stairs. And again, I wasn't overweight. It was just very bizarre. But all these things were adding up. And so all those signs and symptoms. So listening to your body is a number one indicator. I mean, we just have to do that more and more nowadays, because, you could say and just shake it off and go, it's just stress. I'll get over it. I need a good sleep. If it's still there the next day and you haven't gotten rid of it, please do something about it. So that is one huge indicator, is listening to your body and knowing your body. And if you end up going to a professional, a doctor or anyone else, and they say, oh, you're fine, you usually know in your gut if you're not, because you know your body best, right? You know your body. And I would just highly encourage that if you feel like you're not fine, go see another professional. That's all I can say. And then the other things that I would say, and strategies really, are obviously, your nutrition, your fitness. I mean, those are almost common sense, but always take a step back every day and reevaluate how you are living your life. You may be eating well and getting out to the gym, but then are you adding, and that may be great, but then are you adding on so many more hours in front of the computer all the rest of the day? I mean, maybe that's the part that's adding on the stress. So look again at how you're balancing your goodness and then your stress life, and just see if you can make some changes there. And then other than that, it's taking time for yourself and learning to say no. I mean, again, Brené Brown talks about it too, but learning to say no, and even to those you love, will be better in the long run for them. Because, the hardest thing for me during that healing time after my heart attack was saying no to my children, who at the time were young, and saying, no, you know what? I actually can't go to your hockey game tonight. Your dad's going to take you because I need to rest, or I need to just have some quiet time, mommy. That's excruciating for a parent to do, as you know. Like, there's only so much time. But I also knew there would be more hockey games, right? And so I had to learn to do that. It's hard. But then the next day there was another hockey game, and I felt better. I was more excited. My kids were excited for me to go. I think that's a huge thing that we feel guilt. I mean, it's like you brought it up. It's guilt all the time as parents.
Oh, that's such a good, I'm thinking about how hard what you just said is for people to do, especially in our culture too, right? Because we have such a high performing culture here. You're supposed to be on the grind. Like, it's a badge of honor. People brag about how full their calendar is every day, right?
I know. And that's the way I was. I've always been like that, Jeff. I think, again, looking back to my 20s, and like, I didn't get married till like 29. So my whole 20s were basically building my portfolio and my resume to climb that corporate ladder, if you will, in the journalism world. And what job could I get that would give me more exposure? I mean, it's funny. Nowadays, we call it personal branding. Back then, we didn't really have that coined term, but I was always trying to build my persona, if you will, out there so that I could get more recognized. Adding stress to my life. I mean, I was just not taking time for me because I was that A personality, A type, and I still am. I mean, don't get me wrong, but now I'm a lot more selective in what I actually do and where I put my energy and who I give my energy to, what projects I take on. A lot of that comes with experience as we get older anyway. But I think one of the biggest, if I can give any advice to your listeners, I think that, having some time like every week and prioritizing where you're putting your efforts and your energy and who you're spending time with is huge. If I had done that back in my 20s, I think I would have made a lot of different choices.
Yeah, and probably may not have had a heart attack. But then again, you may not have recognized and learned that you had the electrical. Who knows, right? But everything happens for a reason, and your journey has led to a different purpose for you, which has led to a lot of really life change for other people. And I think that's what's so really inspiring about your story. So as we wrap, I know you mentioned the redlilylife.com. How would people that want to express their story, how would they go about doing that there? And give us a little bit of direction there.
Yeah. So I created this platform for anyone, to share their story, no matter how big or small. And so on my platform, redlilylife.com, there is an actual submit your story. It does take you through the process of how you can actually submit it. I will see it. I don't do a huge edit on it. I want it to be everybody's voice for the way they're presenting it. If anyone needs any guidance, I actually have tips on there, and I can do it actually, as well via email on how to do that. But I've had some people share some very, very personal stories about, like, say, breast cancer and how they've moved through that. One woman who's a survivor has written 3 times for me about her journey. She just felt like it was such a great outlet. The reason I started it was because I realized that after I told my heart health story, I had so many of my friends, literally in my social circles, who came to me and said, I'm so in awe of you sharing your story. And I want to do the same, but I also don't work in media and I don't have connections. I don't even want to write a book. I don't want to start a website or a blog, but I'd love to share my story. So that gave me the real idea that this platform isn't necessarily for published writers or people in media. It's for anyone.
Yeah.
And so that's where I got the concept, because I felt I want to provide this platform for people to share their story no matter who you are. I've actually had my son's written on it too. So my son, who's now 20, but he wrote a couple years ago about his experience as well. So honestly, anyone can submit their story. I actually have on there too an author's page. So once you do, I create an author's page, and then all of your submissions get, it looks like a little mini portfolio, but it's a great reference point for people to go in then and to say, look, this is where my story is. And you know what, whether you do something with it, whether you don't, it doesn't matter. It's just an area. It's a safe place to just, share. And I've had a lot of great feedback on doing this. So in the new year and over the next several months, you're actually going to see a lot more on that site as well. A lot more giving back to people who want to learn the art of storytelling, who want to learn why it's healing to share your story for other people and how you can actually heal from sharing your own story. It is so close to my heart. And I share my story on there all the time as well.
Oh, I love it. I'm on the site now looking at it. So what an amazing vehicle. And it's very unique. No one's doing anything like this. So it's kudos to you for that. So is this the best place for people to learn more about you as well? Or do you have another place if people wanted to maybe book you in to speak or come do an author chat, or where can they find more information about you personally?
Yeah. So redlilylife.com is probably the best if you're interested in sharing your story or joining like a community kind of based environment about storytelling. And then anyone who wants to work with me or find out more about what I do on my media side, I usually advise you go to kerrieleebrown.com. That's kind of where I have all of my different things in there. I'm actually updating my website, so you'll see something new in the next little while, but it's there. And I actually now offer media training for those entrepreneurs and those in business and who want to personal brand themselves and learn how to talk and pitch editors, because that's what obviously I've done on the professional side. And then I do speaking as well. I do talks. I do, writing workshops. And I also get out to universities too and talk to aspiring journalists about the art of being in the media and, how it works and the real, how to navigate it, because gosh, today is so crazy out there that there's different avenues you can take in the media world. And so I'm still an advocate of media, even though journalists get a bad rap, but the route that I've taken and the way I bring authenticity and heartfelt storytelling into my stories now and who I interview, I think that's the way of the world and where we're all going to start connecting worldwide. So that's where people can get a hold of me if they're interested.
Love that. So if you're listening, you can go to either redlily.com if you want to get part of that community. I encourage you to go read some of the stories and listen. Or if you want to learn more about Kerrie Lee directly, go to kerrieleebrown.com, but it's KerrieLee, kerrieleebrown.com. And then go check out her book, My Heart, Myself, and listen to this whole journey and read the journey of what you've heard today in more depth and get a few more tools for your toolkit, so to speak. And thank you for what you're putting out into the universe, Kerrie Lee, and the difference you're making, not just for young women and women in general, but for all of us to lean into our story a little bit more, but also to think about taking that pause. And I think the more purposeful we can think about our lives, the more it'll cause us to pause and realize we're maybe running on the treadmill on 11 too much, and it's not helping us actually get to where we're trying to go anyway.
It is. And I mean, just to add to that, Jeff, is that, we're all products of our own, personal adventures. And so basically, one of the things I like to say is to accept change. I mean, you might have stresses as a 20-year-old that it's going to change as you get older. And it's okay to take that pause, reevaluate your life, what you're doing in your life, where you're going, again, where you're spending your energy, and then, just go from there. But it's okay. You're not alone. And I hope that will be a message that I can continue to share. So.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward now to being part of your tribe and you being part of ours. Yes. and walking this journey out together. And we really appreciate you being a guest.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks again.